Good day everyone. We will configure Windows failover cluster and always on availability group on Azure IaaS Virtual Machines in this video. Let's get started. Now that the load balancing rules are created in our previous video, what we will do now is we will make sure ports 5022, which will be your always on endpoint, port 1433, which will be used for your always on listener, and then 58888, which will be used for your backend pool, will all be added to the firewall just to make sure these ports are opened as far as JBSAG1, JBSAG2, and JBSAG3 is concerned. So let's first do it on JBSAG1. Let's search for firewall, and then let's click on Windows Defender Firewall with Advanced Security. Just to keep things in mind, since this is a lab machine, we are doing it from here. But as far as an enterprise is concerned, it will all be done by a different team, and they will be doing it from their perspective. So since it is a lab machine, I'm doing it on each of these servers. So for the inbound rules, let's right click on it and then click on new rule. And then what we'll do is we will click on port. Let's click on next. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to select TCP specified local ports. What I'll do is I will type in 5022.1433 and then 58888. Let's copy that so that we can put the same thing for other servers also. So let's click on next. We will select allow the connection. Click on next. We'll select all these things, and then click on next, and we will name it as AON_PORTS, and then let's click on finish. So it is created here. So now what we'll do is we will do the same thing in JBSAG2 and JBSAG3. Let's search for firewall. Let's add it in the inbound rules. Port. Let's select TCP and then give the required ports. Allow the connection. AON_PORTS. So we have it created. Let's do it on JBSAG3. Let's search for firewall again. Add it in inbound rules. Port. TCP. AON_PORTS. It's added. Now what we'll do is we will configure the cluster on each of these servers. So let's start with JBSAG1. Let's close the firewall on all these servers. Open JBSAG1 and then open Powershell. Okay. So what we'll do now is we will first install the Windows failover clustering component on each of these servers. So this is the command. I've put all these commands in this video's description so you guys can use it if you're following this video. Just press enter here. This is started. Let's do the same thing on JBSAG2 and JBSAG3 also. Powershell, run as administrator. And then on JBSAG3. Let's do the install in AG3 also. We will have to reset the server once the installation is completed. Let's look at AG1. Yeah, once the installation is completed, yeah, it is completed. So what we'll do is like we will restart JBSAG1 first. Let's look at JBSAG2. It's going on. Once the installation completes, yes, it is completed here as well. So let's do a restart here too. Yep, it's time to check JBSAG3 now. We will follow the same approach. Once the installation is completed, we will restart JBSAG3 also. Yep, it completed. Restart. Cool. Once the server comes online, what we'll do is like we will do a cluster validation on JBSAG1, 2, and 3, and then we will configure cluster. Yep, these servers are online now. Let's connect to it one by one. JBSAG1, JBSAG2. Let's give the password. Let's remember the password here. And then JBSAG3. Okay, JBSAG1 is connected. Let's make sure we are online as far as the other two servers are also concerned. So AG2 looks good. Let's look at AG3. Yep, AG3 looks good as well. So now what we'll do is like let's go to JBSAG1, open our best friend PowerShell again. And then what we'll do is like we will execute the PowerShell command that basically performs cluster validation test on JBSAG1, AG2, and AG3. Let's do that and then make sure everything is okay. So this is the command. Again, the commands are all on the okay, so we have an error here. So let's look at it. I think the node is missing the hyphen there. So let's change that. Yep, let's press enter now. Okay. So let's wait for the validation report to be completed. Once this is completed, what I think is like after this, we'll be able to create the required cluster. Yep, it is running now. I'll pause the video now. Once the test cluster is completed, that is a validation report, I will resume back. Okay, so the validation is completed. There are some warnings. Validate software update levels. Check that, everything seems to be okay. And then it is giving some a warning on validate IP configuration and validate network communication. So what we'll do is like if you want, you can look at this particular path and then check the validation report. So this is the validation report. So if you look at it, I'm seeing like there are warnings. So system configuration, it is about the patch level. I think that should be fine. I've validated it already. And for the network also, there are two warnings. I think that should be okay. So what I'm going to do now is like I'm going to create the clusters now. So before doing that, if we can remember this one that we have noted. So this would be critical for us to start with the cluster creation. So what we'll do, we will put that in a notepad file inside JBSAG1 for checking that. So what I'll do now, let's execute this command that will basically create a cluster. So this is the command, and now let's bring up our notepad file. So what we are doing is like we are creating a new cluster with name JBS WikiClust, and the nodes that will be part of this cluster is JBSAG1, JBSAG2 and JBSAG3, and the static address is what we have created already, which is 172.20.1.19 and 192.168.1.19. So since it is going to be a multi-subnet cluster, we have one IP address for JBS Wiki Cluster in East US, and the second IP address is for Korea Central. So let's create it now. So let's wait for it to complete. And once this is completed, we will enable always on availability group on all these three servers, that is JBS AG1, AG2 and AG3 from the configuration manager, and then we will create a availability group. So right now I'm going to pause this video. Once this command completes, I will resume it back. So it is started now. The command is started. It is basically configuring the cluster service. Okay, so it is created now. So what we'll do now is like we will check the cluster administrator and see if everything is created properly. Okay, so if you see here under Failover Cluster Manager, we have this cluster created which is called JBS WikiClust. So what we'll do is like let's click on that and then come down, and then if we look at it, we are able to see that we have this JBS Wiki Cluster. Okay, so now what we'll do is like we will open the configuration manager and then enable always on availability group in each of these servers. So let's go to SQL services, right click MS SQL server, and then you have this always on availability group tab. So we can see this JBS WikiClust. So what we'll do is like let's click on this enable always on availability group. Let's click on apply. This will require a restart of your SQL services. This is the one that basically tells like you need to restart it. So what I'll do is like I will right click and then click on restart. Let's do the same thing for JBSAG2 and JBSAG3 as well. Configuration manager, SQL server. Let's go to the always on availability group. Let's enable that. Click on apply. Then restart it. Now JBSAG3 is done. Go to configuration manager. Let's do the same thing. It's done. Let's restart it. So one more thing that I forgot to do is like to change the SQL service account from NT service to a domain account. So let's do that one as well. So what I'm going to do is like I'm going to change it to this particular account, which is JBSAG2 JBSAG2K1. Again, it's a lab machine, so I'm using this account. But yeah, but as far as production server is concerned, I would suggest like let's create an appropriate login and then add it across to SQL Server. I'll do the same thing for the agent also. Let this happen. Let me do it in. This is for the agent. Let's do it on AG3. So I'm changing the SQL service account from the configuration manager and not from the services.msc. It is a best practice. We do it from the configuration manager. So yeah. Let's change the other service. I'll pause this video. Let me complete this change on all three servers and then I will resume it. Okay, so the service account is changed. Now it is using a domain slash account instead of using NT service. Now what I'm going to do is like I'm going to connect to the SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio, and then going to create a database called JBSWiki. And then what I'll do is like I will add that particular database into availability group. So let's do that. Let's connect to all the three instances here. Two, then your three. Yep, let's create a database called JBSWiki. Okay, the database is created. Let's look at the properties. Let's change the size to maybe 1000. Then log to maybe 250. Let's go to the options. Let's confirm it is in full recovery model. Compatibility level is 160, which is 2022. Let's click on OK. Let's create a table. Column 1 integer identity 1,1 primary key. Column 2 varchar 255. So let's create it. It's created. Let's insert close to 1000 rows into this table. Then 1000. Now, once the insert is completed, let's query the table and then see how many rows we have on this particular table. Yep, so we are able to see close to 1000 rows. Now let's take a database backup, full backup. So start and then click on backup. Not worried much on the backup, so I'm just doing it on the default location. So now what I'll do is let me close it off and then create the availability group. So let's have this object explorer details. Let's go to the always on availability group. And then here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and then click on availability group wizard. So let's make sure we're able to see it properly. Okay, click on next. Let's name this as JBAG. Let's select database level health detection, per database etc support. Click on next. So it is meeting the prerequisites. So selecting this JBS Wiki database, click on next. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add JBSAG2 and JBSAG3. So AG1, JBSAG1 and JBSAG2 would be synchronous availability mode, and it will have automatic failover. And your JBSAG3, which is in Korea Central, would be asynchronous with a manual failover. Readable secondary, I will change that to S. That's it. So let's look at the endpoints. Endpoints, we are using 5022. Remember, we opened this port, so we are good to go. Backup preference, I will select prefer secondary. And then listener, I'm not going to configure right now, and also the read-only routing, not now. So let's click on next. Yeah, I'm going to select automatic seeding. Yep, I don't want to take a backup and then move it and do all those things. So instead, I will select automatic seeding, and let's see if it works. So let's wait for the validations to complete. So we know this warning because we have not selected listener, because listener configuration as far as IaaS is going to be a little different. So let's click on next and then click on finish for this to start. Yep, so let's wait for it. Let's wait for it to complete. In case there is an error, we will look at it further. Let me pause the video. In case there is an error, I will let you know, or else if it completes, I will resume back. So it failed here. So what I'm seeing is creating availability group JBAG, and I'm getting an error. The error is basically 41131. So let's look at the SQL Server error log and then see if we can get something meaningful. Okay, so we are able to see that it is changing from not available to resolving normal, and then resolving normal to not available. So we are getting an 41044 AG integrity check failed. Let's look at the other node, which is your JBSAG2. Let's run it. So if you see here, what I'm able to see is it is basically giving an error. Login failed. Let's look at it further. I don't see any specific error here, so there is a login failed here. So always on availability group, service to start, DB. This is what I'm seeing. Let's look at the logins per se. So we have this entity authority system. Let's see if it is having required permission. It is not a sysadmin, so let's provide the sysadmin access. Let's do that for AG2 also. And AG3. Okay, let's retry it. Okay, let's try it one more time. Okay, so it is showing that the endpoint already exists. Let's click on next. Okay, let's cancel it and then do it from the scratch. Refresh, refresh, and refresh. I think the endpoints are created. Yep, that's the reason we were getting that error. It was trying to recreate it one more time. Okay, let's do it from here. JBAG. We'll have these two things selected as last time. We'll use JBS Wiki. Let's add the other two replicas. So endpoint is already there. Backup preference would be prefer secondary, no listener, read-only routing list also, like will not create it now. You'll use automatic seeding. Next. Yep, let's create it. Let's see what happens this time. Cool, adding NT authority system did the trick. So the availability group is created. Let's click on close. Now let's see if it is actually created. Let me refresh it and then we will look at the dashboard and see if everything is okay. Let's click on that and then click on show dashboard. Okay, so now we have three replicas. We know that. AG1, that is JBS AG1 and JBS AG3, AG2 or synchronous replica with automatic failover, and JBS AG3 is an asynchronous replica with manual failover. So if you look at the database JBS Wiki, AG1 and AG2, that is JBS AG1 and JBS AG2 is showing as synchronized because it is synchronous commit, and AG3 is showing as synchronizing since it is asynchronous. Yep. So now what we'll do is like we will create an listener and we'll take it from there. Okay, so now let's look at the notepad again. So this is the IP address that we'll be using for the listener. So right click on the JBAG role and then go to add resource and then click on client access point. And then let's name it as JBSAPP, which basically is our listener name. If you look at this one, it is basically like we have used JBSAPP as our listener name. So let's click on next. So the IP addresses will be added as DHCP. So once this is created, we will manually change that to the required IP addresses. So let's click on this. And then if you look at IP addresses here, so what we'll do is let's go ahead with cluster network 1. Click on properties. Instead of DHCP, we will go to static IP address, and then we will keep it as 170.21.20. And then let's do the same thing for the IP address as far as Korea Central is also concerned. So this is done. So let's do it on the other IP resource also. Let's change it to static IP address, and then let's use the IP address 192.168.1.20. Let's click on OK. Let's compare it with what we have created already using the load balancer and stuff. So if you see here, the listener name is JBSAPP, and the IP address for East US is 172.20.1.20, and then for Korea Central is 192.168.1.20. Everything looks good. So what we'll do is we will stop the roll, and then we will add this listener name as a dependency for this particular AG. So let's click on this, and then let's add JBSAPP. Click on apply. Click on OK. So what we'll do is let's start this role now. Let's wait for it to come online or fail. So right now JBAG AG is in JBSAG1. So if you look at it, the listener IP address for East US is online now. And if you see here, the availability group is also online. So let's go to the AG1, JBSAG1, and let's look at the dashboard and see if everything looks okay. So if you look at the dashboard, everything seems okay. I've changed the availability mode to synchronous for AG3 also, just for testing, because I'm going to fail over to the secondary and see if I'm able to connect to the listener. So everything seems okay here. Let me close this. So let's look at the listener first. We have this listener created. So let's try connecting to this listener. You're able to connect to it without any issues. Let's go for a new query window and then check the server name to make sure it is pointing to JBSAG1. Yes, it is pointing to that. So now what we'll do is we will fail over the AG to JBSAG2, and then let's see how it is performing. So let's fail over, click on next, and then failure over. Okay, the failover is completed. Let's look at the dashboard. Looks good. Everything is synchronized. Let's try connecting to the listener. Yep, we're able to make the connection to the listener. Let's click on a new query window for this listener. Let's try a select edit server name. It is in JBSAG2. So now what we'll do is we will fail over it to JBSAG3, and then look at the cluster administrator also to see if the IP address related to Korea Central has taken effect. Okay, the failover is completed. Let's look at the AG dashboard. Okay, everything seems good. Everything is synchronized. So what we'll do is like we will try connecting to the listener JBSAPP and see if it works. And before that, let's look at the cluster administrator. And now we can see that JBSAG is resolved to the IP address 192.168.120. So let's try connecting to the listener name there. Seems like it is connected to. Okay, everything looks good. Let's click on new query window. Then select at server name. This JBSAG3. So what we'll do now, we will disconnect this and then we will fail over back to JBSAG1 and then change the availability group commit mode for AG3 to asynchronous, because we just changed it to synchronous just for testing. So let's do the failover. Okay, the failover is completed. Let's look at the dashboard once. Okay, so let's refresh it. All good. Let's go to the AG role, and what I'm seeing is like it is JBS APP is now resolving to the IP address that is in East US. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Jai Hind.